Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Dan Lashoff, and I have the privilege of serving as the U.S. Director of the World Resources Institute. I'm looking forward to a very informative discussion with our panel. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes, but I'll just go over a logistical detail. After the panel speaks, we will take Q&A through the Q&A function of the Zoom meeting. So you can type questions by clicking Q&A at any time during this session, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can as we go along. So again, we will get started in just a minute. And while we're waiting to get started, one other note for any colleagues that are not able to join us at this time, a recording of this webinar will be available on the WRI events page later today, or if you want to relive the excitement, you can watch it again yourself later today. Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. Welcome to Build Back Better, Shaping the U.S. Stimulus Package for Infrastructure. My name is Dan Lashoff, and I have the privilege of serving as the U.S. Director for the World Resources Institute. For those of you who don't know WRI, we are a global think tank that turns ideas into action. We do that through communications, like the webinar you're participating in today, as well as direct engagement and with policymakers and engagement through a wide variety of platforms and partners. I'm going to provide just a short introduction to frame our discussion before turning the microphone over to our panelists. This is truly an unprecedented moment in American history. Already, more than 1,400 people have died in the United States as a result of the COVID-19 virus, and public health experts expect tens of thousands of additional fatalities are likely, even if we adhere extremely well to the social or physical distancing measures that are in place throughout most of the country. While those measures are clearly necessary and are showing early signs of slowing the spread of the disease, they are also having a massive impact on our economy. In just the last 2 weeks of March, over 10 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits. Congress has responded by, let me move to the next slide. Congress has responded in an unprecedented manner as well, in just passing 3 emergency measures, with the most recent one enacted less than 2 weeks ago, providing more than $2 trillion in direct cash payments, extended unemployment insurance, and loans to small and large businesses. The scale of this legislation is larger than anything enacted since World War II, and yet there's growing agreement that even more needs to be done. While the situation remains fluid and Congress could change direction at any time, it now appears likely that Congress will quickly pass a 4th emergency spending bill, largely designed to send more money through the channels contained in COVID-3, particularly for small businesses. After that, Speaker Pelosi and President Trump have both signaled support for a major investment in infrastructure to reboot and strengthen the economy once Americans are able to return to work. While Senate Majority Leader McConnell has called for a more cautious wait-and-see approach, most economists agree that additional economic stimulus will be needed, and members of Congress and their staff are currently working to put the next bill together. So what could the central elements of an effort to not only get people back to work as quickly as possible, but also lay the groundwork for the clean energy transition that we must make to avert the worst consequences of climate change? While the situation is vastly different now, our closest historical analog is the 2009 American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, representing just over 10% of the total. The Recovery Act's $90 billion of clean energy investments remains the single largest clean energy investment in American history. And while by no means perfect, it was in fact a great success. It supported 900,000 job years between 2009 and 2015, spread across renewable energy, energy efficiency, and transportation and industry. And these sectors have importantly continued to grow since the spending from the Recovery Act ended. And since 2015, the clean energy sectors have in fact been among the fastest growing sectors of the economy. Wind jobs grew 49%, as you can see, energy efficiency 25%, solar 19%, compared with only 7% job growth in the private sector. Shortly, we'll hear from Richard Kaufman and Kathy Zoy, both of whom were directly involved in implementing parts of the Recovery Act at the Department of Energy. And they'll share their thoughts on both lessons learned and from the Recovery Act and thoughts about how to move forward. But first, I want to ask my colleague Devashree Saha to provide an overview of WRI's recommended priorities for Building Back Better. Devashree is a senior associate with WRI's U.S. program. Before joining WRI, she led the Council of State Governments Energy and Environmental Policy work, and previously she researched clean energy innovations at the Brookings Institution and worked at the National Governors Association. Devashree, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Dan. So let me pull up my presentation. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And as Dan mentioned, these are truly unusual circumstances, to say the least. I have a short presentation, and I want to touch upon two things in my remarks. So the first thing is, as the conversation turns to infrastructure investment, why are we emphasizing investment in low carbon infrastructure at this time? And the second thing that I want to touch upon is provide some examples of what could be these different types of low carbon infrastructure investment. So the economic downturn caused by COVID-19 has focused political attention on economic recovery and jobs retention and creation. So as trillions of dollars are being spent to stimulate the economy, the question before us is, can we direct this investment in a manner that not only creates opportunities for revival of economic activity and job creation, but also leads to the creation of a more sustainable and resilient economy in the future? So we have a combination of factors going on currently. We have a lot of skilled unemployed workers. We have a backlog of investment in infrastructure and a looming climate crisis. So given these combination of factors, this is truly an opportunity to not only rebuild the economy, but also build it back better than it was before. So let me turn to a few examples of investment in low carbon infrastructure, which can not only get people back to work as quickly as possible, but also lay the groundwork for the clean energy transition. So let me start with—
Devashree, your slides aren't showing, so I think you might need to click share one more time to show these. Okay. Of course, it worked flawlessly in practice.
Is it showing now?
Not yet.
Is it showing now?
Yes, there you go.
Okay, sorry about that. So let me start from this slide on building efficiency. Can everybody see this? Okay.
Yes, good.
Okay, good. So let me start with energy efficiency. This sector is already America's job creation powerhouse. We employ 2.4 million American workers in this sector, and this is the fastest growing part of the energy sector. Obviously, COVID-19 is having an impact on this sector as work to retrofit buildings comes to a halt. but retrofitting the millions of homes and businesses across the country can play a leading role in putting Americans back to work. These are going to be local jobs in every part of the country and in sectors like construction and manufacturing, which have been especially hard hit during this time. And according to one study, every 1 million investment creates approximately 8 full-time jobs in energy efficiency, which is nearly 3 times the number of jobs created in the fossil fuel sector. Moving on to smart grid, I know that Richard is going to talk in more depth about smart grid, but let me just say this. We all know that the electric grid is aging, and the country faces the challenge of upgrading and modernizing the grid. And on top of that, we are also putting new demands on the system, such as integrating increasing amounts of renewable energy and also keeping pace with new demands for electricity. And again, the benefits of a smart grid will be widespread geographically, and it will occur over a long period. Research has shown that every 1 billion of US transmission investment can generate 2.4 billion in total economic activity, in addition to creating thousands of full-time jobs. And in addition to these job creation benefits, there are other important benefits to consider, such as improving the reliability and resiliency of the grid to unexpected events, reducing the cost of producing electricity, and finally, of course, the environmental benefits. I also want to talk about public transit, especially zero emission ones, and this can also be a priority in the next infrastructure investment conversation. Similar to our energy infrastructure, the current transportation infrastructure is aging and it needs massive dose of investment. And we all know that the public transit system is crucial for access to jobs and other opportunities. So it kind of makes sense to increase federal spending to make smart investments in zero emission public transportation system. And this can actually provide a significant boost to the US economy at this crucial time. Just to give an example, investing in electric school and transit buses will cut down on diesel pollution. It will lower the operating costs for school districts and transit systems throughout the country, and also have the potential to bring idle factories back online to build these electric buses. Finally, I want to turn to this important priority related to tree restoration. We can actually create more than 150,000 jobs annually by committing sustained federal dollars to a major tree restoration effort. And this type of investment is especially going to be beneficial for rural economies that have been lagging behind urban economies for decades. And they could be further disadvantaged due to the COVID-19 outbreak. And research, WRI research has shown that if this effort is sustained, 60 billion trees can be restored to the landscape. And this has the potential to remove 500 million tons of CO2 per year from the atmosphere, which is going to be a major effort in our climate change initiatives. So in short, I just want to wrap it up by saying that there's an opportunity before Congress to prioritize investments that not only address the immediate needs of job creation, but they can also unleash other co-benefits that will strengthen the long-term sustainability and resilience of this country. So I'll stop here and will be happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Debashree. Now let's get a perspective from Richard Kaufman. He is currently chairman of the New York State Energy Research and Development Administration and a fellow at Columbia University. From 2013 to 2019, he served as New York State's Energy Czar, or chairman of Energy and Finance, and in that capacity oversaw all of New York State's energy agencies, including the Public Service Commission, the New York Power Authority, and the Long Island Power Administration, as well as NYSERDA. From 2011 to 2012, he served as senior advisor to Energy Secretary Chu and was responsible for implementing key portions of the Recovery Act. Before that, he served in many leadership roles in finance. So, Richard, we're looking forward to your comments.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you all. Okay. So the 2009 Recovery Act did a lot to advance clean energy, and there are many lessons to be drawn. And here are 3 best lessons and 3 less than best that ought to inform the next effort at clean energy infrastructure spending. So on the less than best, ARRA spent money across many initiatives, from innovation to grants to manufacturers, to weatherization, to transportation, to worker training, carbon sequestration, and renewable energy deployment. But spreading the money around like this didn't always create critical mass. So as an example, ARRA spent $3.4 billion on the smart grid, $3.4 billion, against a total needed of around $500 billion. Some of the funding for specific projects was distributed from Washington. The DOE loan program, which was certainly successful, evaluated and managed every loan. It meant cumbersome process, and only large loans could be executed from Washington. Because of the concern that government intervention should be short-lived, some of the activities weren't given enough money to achieve self-sufficiency. That's the point about funding of piers, not bridges. The weatherization program set up funding for community groups to identify energy efficiency projects and loans for those projects, but the loan money couldn't be easily recycled, so the community groups had to stop originating projects once the funding stopped. On the best lessons, funds spent on deployment continue to pay dividends, since with greater deployment, costs declined, which have continued to spur a greater deployment even today. Another best lesson is that the funds distributed through states were often effective. Projects are local, and capability of states to implement clean energy programs have actually improved since 2009 as the federal government activities have lagged. And the last best lesson is that a number of policies leverage private sector capital. So building on these lessons, here are 3 stimulus ideas. The first idea: we should take this opportunity to make a major step forward to build the smart grid. We've been talking about it for a long time. The current grid is energy and capital efficient. The current rate of spend isn't getting the job done, since modernization costs are put into the local utility rate base. We simply can't achieve our clean energy goals with our current grid, at least on a cost-effective basis. We need a dynamic two-way grid that can accommodate much more renewables, EVs, electrification of heat, and the ability to optimize billions of devices that should be connected to the grid. $100 billion would be about 20% of the costs. It would be a large enough commitment so that substantial customer benefits can be demonstrated. And once demonstrated, subsequent funding, the remaining, say, $400 billion, can be taken on by state regulators and utilities. The second idea: much of the distributed parts of the grid are financed through competitive markets, not through utility balance sheets. Smaller solar storage projects and efficiency projects have had difficulty getting debt financing even before the virus. Their problem is not the cost of debt, it's simply the availability of that debt. And that's why a number of states and cities have set up their green banks to offer loans to smaller clean energy projects. Green banks don't generally compete with private sector banks. In fact, they do the work to incubate financing structures and to create enough scale so that private lenders can eventually take over the opportunity. New York State has lent $1 billion in its green bank to projects in New York State and gets at least 3 times leverage on public dollars. And all kinds of jobs have been supported, from construction to manufacturing, as more projects are deployed. An infrastructure bill that would give states and cities that have a green bank or want to set one up access to $10 billion in low-cost treasury debt or grants would scale up lending to smaller projects. And after all, these projects are local, the lending should be local. The third idea, let's make a commitment to retrofit the many millions of multifamily housing units in the US. Much of it is energy inefficient, uncomfortable, and unhealthy. The good news is that there are a couple of basic architectural styles, so think garden apartments as an example. That creates an opportunity to build a new industry of standardized manufactured components, windows, walls, HVAC, that can be assembled on site without tenants needing to leave their apartments. This idea is already underway with Retrofit New York. $3 billion in funding will aggregate demand, challenge manufacturers, and provide sufficient grants to bring costs down to parity with traditional retrofits and be leveraged 5 times by private capital to reach an initial market of 400,000 units. And at this level of scale, costs will become competitive with conventional retrofits. No more incentives will be needed, and it will lead to rapid scale up to the rest of the market. These 3 ideas build a bridge to self-sustaining, better energy infrastructure that will achieve transformational scale.
Richard, thank you. Those are terrific ideas, and really we all benefit from your experience both as a federal implementer and then at the state level trying to get this stuff financed on the ground. So that is great. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Kathy Zoi. Kathy is the CEO of EVgo, the largest fast charging network in the United States. And Kathy also was at the Department of Energy from 2011 to, from 2009 through 2011. She was Assistant Secretary of Energy Efficiency and Renewables and Acting Deputy Secretary, and has also served in a variety of other government and private sector roles. So she also brings a great combination of experience to this discussion. I first met Kathy when she pioneered the Green Lights program at EPA back in the day. I don't even want to say how long ago that was. Kathy, I think you were about 12 at the time.
And so were you, and so were you. All righty, thanks, Dan. Great to be here. Let me do the share screen thing. All righty. All right, so appreciate the opportunity, and thank you to WRI for pulling this together, such an important topic. Just in getting ready for talking to all of you about what we can do this time around with creating a really effective stimulus, I just looked in the context of, we're talking about trillions of dollars that have already been put toward the COVID bailout efforts. The whole US economy last year had about $21 trillion of GDP. And so I thought about, like, if we're going to move more money towards the sector that we care most about and ensure that we've got a dovetailing of getting the economy back along with moving us into a clean energy economy, what are the sectors that matter to us? Well, of course, the energy economy is straight up is about $1 trillion. So it's about a fifth of GDP every year. In addition to that, though, you think about other key sectors that are important for this transition, and cars is one of them. I mean, cars comprise 3% of US GDP every year. There are more manufacturing jobs in the automobile sector than in any other manufacturing sector. About 1 million people are directly making cars, or were making cars last year. Another 1 million work in dealerships associated with that. And what the economists tell us is that the flow-on effect, the indirect jobs that come from a healthy automobile economy in the US are 10 to 14 million. So that's significant. So that's one of the reasons. It's not just the opportunities to clean up our transportation sector, but that's one of the reasons is there's so much emphasis across the political aisle on making sure that our car sector is healthy. The other sector, which again also dovetails with what Richard was talking about, is housing. It turns out that housing comprises about 15% of US GDP in a good year. About close to $1 million of a million people are employed in the housing sector each year. So again, what you'll see from me is where we can actually marry what we want to get done to make sure that we're on a trajectory of reducing greenhouse gas emissions while also focusing on key sectors of the US economy. And what we're really trying to do here is accelerate adoption of non-polluting climate-friendly technologies and services and use the stimulus to get that done fast. The good news is, and you can see that, like that technology adoption curve that's at the top left of my slide here, we're trying to move the early innovations into the majority mainstream part of the economy. The good news is that we've done this well, and Richard mentioned it, Dan mentioned it, in the Recovery Act that was passed in 2009 and implemented in the early part of the Obama administration. We were able to put policies in place that had a huge impact on solar, on wind, on batteries, and on lighting. And this data was most recently pulled together by the Rocky Mountain Institute, but there's been a lot of research that's been done that has shown that with a combination of activities to invest to accelerate that transition to majority markets, we were able to be effective. And what I'd like to point out, though, is that it's not simply, we tend to think of these buckets of money going toward directly supporting these technologies. Well, that's true, that's part of it, but it's actually an ecosystem of policies that really gets the job done. I mean, I put them in 4 major buckets, which are grants and loans first, tax incentives and tax breaks and tax penalties, carrots and sticks on the tax side, target standards and codes, which aren't necessarily buckets of money, but can be instrumental in moving markets forward. And then finally, information and marketing. Now today I'll focus a little bit on what some of the great successes in that top bucket. And again, I think Richard and Dan mentioned a couple of these, but we had, Richard oversaw about $6.5 billion of loan guarantees that helped many parts of the clean energy sector. There were $2 billion of direct renewable energy grants that I oversaw in my energy efficiency and renewable energy portfolio at DOE. $5 billion of weatherization assistance that went directly to homeowners through community action agencies. And then finally, $8 billion of loans to the car companies to make sure that they stayed alive. The last one I'd mention, I think is really important and relevant now, is that the Cash for Clunkers program was a $3 billion stimulus that led to $13 billion of new car purchases. And again, one of the themes that comes up for me is what amount of leverage will one tax dollar get you for other economic activities? And that particular program shows some really interesting leverage. There's so many other things that we should talk about as we think about what were as Richard said, the good and the less than good lessons from the Recovery Act and how has technology moved on. But what I'd like to turn to now just quickly is some of my favorite must-haves for where we are right now. And as Dan mentioned, I run EVgo, which is the largest public fast charging company in the United States. We are in 34 states. We have 800 stations operating, and we're growing really quickly. We had been operating under a forecast where we were expecting to get to 5 million EVs on US roads by 2025. What that necessitates is roughly 45,000 fast chargers to be built, and about 500,000 level 2s, or again, these are all public, not in people's garages, level 2s that are a slower charge, but that can work well for workplaces where you're going to have your car for a long time. It is really what car companies will tell you, and the OEMs have announced that they're investing more than $300 billion to electrify their fleets. We want them to stay that course. We absolutely want them to stay that course. But what they say is the only way that we're going to have the technology adoption to EV really be successful is if we've got low cost batteries so the cars are affordable. Well, that's actually happening. We've seen that in that first graph I showed you about the progress on batteries. We're well on our way. The second thing that the car companies will tell you is that the cars have to have a range that's more than a couple hundred miles. Again, we have those cars coming to market now and many choices. The third thing they will tell you, though, is Americans will not buy EVs unless they feel comfortable that they'll be able to charge them everywhere. So having ubiquitous charging infrastructure is a linchpin to electrification of transportation. So what will it take in terms of a public investment through a stimulus to get to not nominally this 45,000 DC fast chargers and 500,000 public level 2 chargers? It's about $10 billion. So it's not the same amount of money that's required to totally modernize our grid, as Richard talked about, but it's a really, really important cornerstone. Second thing, again, dovetailing with what Richard said, housing. Not just, I would say, not do we only need to retrofit existing housing. We have a severe housing shortage, and we have a homelessness crisis. I mean, Freddie Mac just last month said we're more than 3 million units undersupplied in terms of housing. And that's not just in America's big cities. That shortage and that affordability challenge is happening across America. When you have a sector that's 15% of GDP, like housing is, actually making sure that when we using the stimulus to jumpstart the housing builds and to do it sustainably, with energy efficiency built in, with distributed generation, with storage, and with charging infrastructure built into multi-unit dwellings, critically important. The final point that I would make is that the way to get this done well is through public-private partnerships. Having government money seed and release private sector capital from the sidelines by de-risking it in volatile times like this is critically important. We saw this in the Recovery Act, and I think we'll see it now again. And again, I would just echo Richard's suggestion that having this money be managed and distributed and administered at the state level, you're closer to the ground, and it will allow for agility and a great success in moving it quickly. And with that, I'll look forward to the discussion that will follow.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And certainly we know now that as emissions have declined from the power sector, transportation is our biggest source of pollution. And so having the infrastructure we need to electrify the transportation sector is absolutely critical. And I can say from personal experience that we definitely need a little bit more fast charging infrastructure on the roads. My son's actually currently driving an electric car from California to New Mexico and almost ran out of juice outside of Needles because it was just didn't quite have enough stations along the way. So with that, we're going to turn to a local perspective now. We're really fortunate to have Chris Castro, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer in Orlando and Senior Advisor to Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer. He is just well known as a energetic and innovative leader in sustainability and has held a variety of roles and also a star turn in the movie From Pittsburgh to Paris, even though he's not from Pittsburgh or Paris, just showing how important his work in Orlando has been. So Chris.
Thank you so much, Dan, and I'm about to share the screen here. Okay, hopefully you all can see that now. First of all, thank you, Dan, and to all of the other panelists. It's quite an honor to be on this panel, and I really appreciate WRI bringing us together to kind of forecast how we could build back better and bringing in the local government context. The city of Orlando is one of the fastest growing cities in the country. We're seeing between 1,000 and 1,500 people moving every single week to our city, not to mention the amount of tourism that we saw last year, above 75 million people. So it's about a 200,000 people per day addition when you incorporate the tourists. So we're kind of in this growth spurt, and we do see the opportunity that future stimulus could have on expanding upon the work that the Recovery Act did. And so I want to run through a few of those scenarios that were really beneficial for the city of Orlando. The first is the focus on the EECBG block grants, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation block grants, which in local governments across this country really spurred energy efficiency retrofits in homes and commercial buildings and really helped modernize the overall infrastructure that we had. What was interesting is the city of Orlando decided to invest $1.75 million of those funds into retrofitting our own city buildings. And we saw really good returns on that, usually less than 5 years, and annual savings of 250 to 300,000 with that investment. And what it helped us to do was make the case for one of the largest municipal green bonds in the country. Shortly after the retrofits of the Recovery Act, we passed the $17.5 million municipal green bond. And it helped us to now go back into 55 additional city facilities, major venues like our Amway Arena, which you can see a screenshot there, that got lighting retrofits and building automation and control systems and other HVAC improvements that are now yielding significant savings. Now we're seeing over $2 million per year in annual avoided costs, and creatively took those funds in the bond and are taking the savings to repay it back. So essentially a energy savings performance contract, but just administered in-house. And so I do think that there's a huge opportunity for us to revitalize the movement of local governments reinvesting and modernizing their infrastructure to make them more efficient. In addition, this also spurred this notion around an ecosystem of policies and programs for energy efficiency. Kathy mentioned the ecosystem that she was talking about as well. And what we identified was that there were other market triggers that we needed to implement to really create a robust market for efficiency in the built environment. And we did everything from enabling a building benchmarking and transparency, as well as an energy audit requirement for commercial buildings, enabled a suite of different energy financing programs. It's interesting, when you thought back to 2010, cities weren't really in the game of creating financing programs or enabling capital and working with banks to open up that those monies. And now we've implemented everything from property assessed clean energy to nonprofit loan programs like the Solar and Energy Loan Fund, and even working with local credit unions and banks to offer energy efficiency and solar loans. The last thing I'll mention here is workforce development and training, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to retrain some of the individuals who are currently unemployed and get them equipped with heading into the clean energy economy. We work very closely with the University of Central Florida and Valencia College to develop a new Associates of Science and Bachelors of Science degree that focuses on energy management and controls, as well as renewable energy, and it's starting to see a tremendous impact. As you can see on the right there, over the last 2 years of PACE financing, we've seen over 1,000 improvements that have gone towards improving the resilience of our infrastructure, renewables, and efficiency, and that created significant amount of jobs, over 474 local jobs to Orlando, gross economic output of over $45 million. And so you can see how leveraging the Recovery Act has really helped to boost additional local investments. Moving forward to dovetail on what Kathy was alluding to regarding housing, I think that there's a tremendous opportunity around addressing the affordable housing crisis that we're facing in this country. Interestingly enough, the U.S. Conference of Mayors does a survey many times throughout the year, and over the last year, we've seen that affordable housing is the #1 issue facing local governments to date. And so what we've tried to do is expand our weatherization programs, and I think there's a true opportunity here of doing that with another stimulus, really targeting some of our low and moderate income households and incorporating requirements when we're allocating HUD funding, whether it's CDBG, whether it's SHIP or home funds, which are both state programs in the state of Florida, to help us to renovate some of these homes with more efficient appliances and equipment. We, as you can see right here, have started to map out burdens of our community, whether it's electricity burdens, water burdens, transportation, and even food security. And this is a snapshot of household electricity burdens throughout the city. And what we've started to do is really target those parts of our communities through a program called Efficiency Delivered with our utility that offers a free home energy assessment and then $2,000 of on-bill financing that's income-based, subsidized based on the household income. And so we cover up to 85% of that $2,000 investment for homeowners that are making under a $40,000 household year income. And so we feel that we could certainly leverage and take this program to the next level. Quickly pivoting to a couple of other topics, following the Recovery Act, we were named one of the Solar America cities back in 2010 and really saw Orlando's opportunity to take advantage of the Sunshine State and the resources that we have. Here you see a myriad of different applications from rooftop systems on our fleet and facilities headquarters there on the left. To the top right, we've actually been exploring photovoltaics and have become a national test site for the National Renewable Energy Lab for NREL to begin testing how floating solar can contribute. And then lastly, these larger scale community solar farms. This one happens to be built on an old coal ash landfill and trying to repurpose brownfields and other lands to larger scale renewables developments. But on a citywide perspective, I think it's important to note that helping to restore and extend the tax credits for renewables and energy storage projects could be a tremendous boost to the industry and continue the momentum of growth. In Florida, solar was the fastest growing job in both 2018 and 2019, according to Yahoo Finance and E2's jobs report. And essentially what we see is a tremendous amount of opportunity just in Orlando, over 4 gigawatts of rooftop solar capacity based on using REOPT modeling from NREL. And then we've also identified that local governments play a role in streamlining permitting. So we've gone through the SolSmart certification and become SolSmart Gold, as well as enabling things like solar cooperatives. In Florida, we don't have the ability of entering into third-party power purchase agreements. And so we're seeing these unique models where homeowners are bundling their demand and achieving a better economy of scale by joining forces. So a lot of opportunity there. The last area in citywide renewables I'll mention is expanding R&D and research development and deployment of clean tech innovations. We're fortunate here in Orlando that we have a Florida Solar Energy Center, essentially the Clean Energy Resource Institute for the state, and a Megawatt Ventures program is something that we kicked off back in the Recovery Act and are looking to continue moving forward. Last topic I'll talk about and turn it back over is EV readiness. And I think Kathy really hit this point on the infrastructure component, but restoring and expanding credits for charging infrastructure and vehicles is a big deal. Orlando, also ChargePoint America City, we've built out over 400 public level 2 EV charging stations and are now growing rapidly in our level 3 deployments. Our city fleets are starting to incorporate significant number of EVs. We even have EV motorcycles that you can see there at the bottom. And in partnership with our utility, are working with our transit authority to electrify buses. So we have a battery as a service model where we are now starting to get creative. I do think that the focus on helping public transit accelerate the deployment of electric buses is a tremendous opportunity that we have ahead of us. Lastly, I will make a plug for those who haven't seen Paris to Pittsburgh. It's a wonderful documentary that showcases some of these in kind of video format and what the work that local governments are doing to advance climate action. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Well, we have an embarrassment of riches in terms of expertise who are participating in this discussion. One additional local perspective I want to turn to now is Lauren Faber, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer in Los Angeles. And of course, Los Angeles is, I think, the leading electric bus program in the United States, has a very diverse population and a very strong climate action plan. So Lauren, if you could just share a few observations about both the opportunities and challenges you're seeing in Los Angeles and where you think a stimulus investment would make the biggest difference for you. That'd be great.
Absolutely. And can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I know that we're running low on time and there's such a wonderful array of questions that are already popping up in the Q&A box. So I don't want to take away from the conversation, but just as a few quick observations, I really do align myself to the comments that have been made before, that these are recommendations that really do apply to a city like Los Angeles that is almost, many, many small cities into one. And we sort of boil it down in terms of infrastructure. We boil it down as how those intersect with our climate goals through what the mayor calls the 5 zeros. So it's a zero carbon grid, zero carbon buildings, zero carbon transportation, zero waste, and zero wasted water. And within all of those areas where we really do need to get to either 100% renewable energy or decarbonize those systems, those are major infrastructure investments that themselves, we've been able to see in Los Angeles alone bring significant benefits in terms of job creation throughout the supply chain, and also equity and health improvement. And so as we're looking at the nexus of public health in terms of where we currently stand, and we are seeing data starting to come in globally showing the nexus between COVID-19 morbidity and mortality outcomes in cities and pollution centers. And so really being able to marry the two of those, whereas we move into renewable energy, which will require significant grid modernization, as we decarbonize our buildings, improving indoor air quality, which is perceptible. I mean, it is a calculable amount of improvement in terms of indoor air quality, as well as, of course, saving people money on their energy and utility bills. Transportation, need not say much more about the air pollution impacts, the air quality improvements, but also the health improvements of mode shift and getting people out of their personal vehicles. So both the incredible importance of moving to electric vehicles for passenger vehicles, for medium and heavy duty, and what kind of help that provides in terms of job creation, local manufacturing opportunities, both in not just the vehicles themselves, in the associated products, the batteries, the materials, all of that together, as well as the health improvements from helping people get out of their cars and the local public infrastructure in and around the public right-of-way that needs to be invested in for more transit-oriented communities, which again then layers in housing and significant opportunities in housing. And then on zero waste, really exciting opportunity where we're literally creating markets that don't exist anymore. So when you're thinking about economic opportunity in waste, we are as a city paying many more millions of dollars for someone else to take and deal with our otherwise recyclable waste than we used to receive as revenue for exporting that material to recycling centers. So it's a significant pull and drain on resources for cities all around the country, and investment in local infrastructure to pick up those recycling markets would have significant benefits. And then on the water side as well, we're moving towards zero wasted water, as I said, where we're going to have 100% of our water recycled in Los Angeles. And that's requiring increasing our local water infrastructure to be able to do that. And also what we're excited about there is looking at what the workforce needs and opportunities are as we are moving from high carbon intensity industries to cleaner industries, and what kinds of skills matching exist when you move into building pipes for water infrastructure or other types of areas as well, building and maintaining recycling infrastructure, recycling facilities. But we see that, in, for example, a city like Los Angeles that has its own municipal utility, the largest municipal utility in the country, we can tell you that the boom and bust of the tax credits for renewable energy are very real and affect our ability to meet our goals, effect on our ability to build in the infrastructure. We're spending $8 billion in grid upgrades just over the next 3 years. And we expect that to support 45,000 jobs in Los Angeles. And I could go through with building decarbonization, with transportation, and building out of our public transit system, ongoing set of job support that it creates. And so not only being able to further support and incentivize that work through funding, but I think, as Kathy was saying, the use of the implementation of national standards is an extremely helpful and important way to make sure that the pace that we need to see, that Richard was talking about, where we really need to drill down in certain sectors and certain industries, the adoption rate of that really depends on local, state, and federal mandates and targets, and that plays a really important role as well. So I'll turn it over. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lauren. Here we are. We've got 10 minutes left. We have over 75 questions in the Q&A. We're not going to be able to get to all of them by any means. Quite a few people asked about references for some of the slides. We will try to make the slides available, but also Reese has typed in an answer there. Most of those references are available from links, at least for the WRI content, from our blogs at wri.org/blog. So take a look at that. A number of questions have touched on the equity issue, so I want to bring that up. One of the things like electric vehicles, rooftop solar are often characterized as benefits for more affluent people, and we know that air pollution affects low-income people of color most severely. The COVID virus just exacerbates some of those differences. So what do we know about how to make sure that the kind of clean energy investments we're talking about actually improve equity rather than exacerbate the income disparities that we see? Deborah, do you want to take a first stab at that, and then I'll see if somebody else wants to jump in.
Yeah, I think, Dan, that's a very important question. And I think that this is an important lens through which we must see any potential stimulus program. I wouldn't be surprised that in the next couple of years, we are going to see trillions of dollars of US household wealth being wiped out. And so as the recovery process takes hold, if the bottom half of the population is disproportionately hit, and if they do not benefit equitably from the subsequent recovery, that's going to be a recipe for more inequality and more social unrest in the country. And I also worry that people might not want to prioritize climate action at those times. So the good thing is that a lot of the investments that we are talking about in, weatherization or public transit investments, they can also be very equity enhancing. I mean, thinking about weatherization programs for low-income households, they can save at least a few $100s annually on utility bills. The money can be put to other uses, and so prioritizing programs like this is going to be really important, and we have to put equity and social justice issues front and center as we think about potential stimulus programs.
Thanks.
Hey, Dan, can I jump in on this? Because
yes.
I think I don't want to be a hammer where, building out the smart grid is what do you know what I'm trying to say? The issue about equity, there are lots of them, but a couple of points is that we still, with our current grid, have a lot of power plants located in communities where they have disproportionate health problems associated with those fossil fuel plants. So the more that we can build a grid that has more renewables, that will have health benefits. But beyond that, utility bills are essentially, quite regressive. And so when we burden the cost, the very modest costs that we're already spending to try to modernize the grid on the utility, in the utility rate base, we're making people at lower incomes pay more and more, and that's not right. And the last point I'll make is when we talk about the ability to do retrofits on housing, we're really talking about trying to make smart houses too that can be mini energy centers, and so it means that that helps change the economics of doing a lot of retrofits. And so again, without having a smart grid that can optimize those kinds of solutions, it deprives a revenue stream to help make more and more retrofits economic.
Dan, and the only addition I would really have is I think at the high level, in the city of Orlando, we have MWBE requirements, minority and women-owned business requirements. And I think there could be a notion here that that we require a certain percentage of the stimulus allocation to go towards MWBE, the way that we require it often at the local government level. And that can help enhance, obviously, employment. And when it comes down to affordability and getting yourself out of a current poverty situation, it's all about employment and jobs and your ability to sustain yourself. And the more that we require money to go towards MWBE, the more those jobs will increase, and hopefully the more that people will be lifted out of their current burdened situation.
Okay, thanks. So we have a number of questions from a variety of people, several from Kate Gordon, who many of you may know has been very active in this field for a long time and currently the Director of the Office of Policy and Research and the Senior Climate Advisor to Governor Newsom. So I want to try to answer some of her questions. A variety of things, but I think why don't we start on this question of job quality, because I think sometimes the idea of jobs in energy efficiency or renewables are presented as a substitute for fossil fuel jobs, which inevitably will decline as we transition to a clean energy economy. But there's questions about wages, about whether the efficiency jobs are permanent versus temporary. How do we think about that and address that from a perspective? What I guess one question would be what is the experience from the Recovery Act, and then what could we do different going forward? Anybody wants to take that one?
I mean, I'll talk to it. Hey, Kate, nice to hear from you this way. Yes, so when we were implementing the Weatherization Assistance Program, and that was a $5 billion program that was, the money was allocated to community action agencies at a local level through the states. Those community action agencies scaled up, and the basic weatherization activities were caulking, weather stripping, some attic insulation that were, there's some training required, but they were not super high skilled. When it comes to tuning up air conditioning and that sort of thing, that requires a higher level of skill of somebody who's a tradesman who understands HVAC systems. We were required back in the Weatherization Assistance Program to ensure that Davis-Bacon wages through the Department of Labor were being paid to those people. So that was part of the rules, and they were based on the skill level required for that work. That is probably not a bad thing to ensure going forward. My biggest disappointment with the Weatherization Assistance Program is what Richard said, which was because it was, the ramp up was based solely on a bucket of money, there was no investment made in ensuring that there was a continual project flow after WAP ended. Those were good jobs, but they kind of fell off a cliff when the money stopped. So what I would like us to be mindful of this go round is ensuring that we're making an investment in building up a sector that can carry on, because surely we didn't complete the need for weatherizing low-income people's homes, and yet the work kind of stopped afterwards.
Great, thanks. So again, so many questions, but an important one from one participant here about mid-sized cities, which is a really important part of the U.S. economy and emissions, and the concern that the congressional aid from the Federal Reserve has really been directed so far only to large cities over 500,000. So does anybody have, and Orlando, I guess, is kind of in the mid to bigger city size, probably over the limit, but what comments do people have about how to make sure that we are not leaving out these mid-sized cities, which is where so much of our population is living now? Anybody?
Well, I can, as a mid-sized city, we're in that 300 to 500,000 actual. So I do think that there's a really important point to be made, that philanthropy has stepped in over the course of the last 5 to 10 years or so to help spur some of this work at the mid and small scale city level, as well as large scale. We think about the City Energy Project and the American Cities Climate Challenge now that's up and running. And I do think that it's important that we work through our states and with with the federal government to ensure that those funds are being released to all size cities and targeting those that have significant carbon output, Orlando being one of those, because of not just our population, but the tourism as well. I'm not sure how to go about doing that and would need advice, but I do think it's a very important point.
Okay, well, we're right at the top of the hour and I want to respect everybody's time. So a lot of important ideas here, a lot of good questions. I think we're in a very dynamic situation with the country investing unprecedented amount of monies, both for immediate economic relief, but hopefully also for sustained and sustainable growth as people are allowed to go back to work when the virus abates. So really appreciate everybody's time on the panel and all the participants for joining us. And again, for those of you who want to refer any colleagues to this, we will have a recording of this up on the WRI events page later today. There are a number of blogs up on our website that provide additional information and references that some of you have asked for. So with that, again, thank you very much. Really appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.